Gene Kelly walked into rehearsal hall B at 2:14 in the afternoon and didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The room adjusted the moment he appeared in the doorway, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a room adjusts when someone walks in who has been famous longer than most of the people present have been alive. MGM Studios in Culver City was his building. Not legally, not anymore, but in the way that actually matters. He had filmed Singin' in the Rain on this lot. He had spent more combined hours in these rehearsal halls than he had in his own apartment. The floors carried the specific scuff marks of 40 years of his footwork. At 70 years old, Gene Kelly still walked like a man who had somewhere to be and complete certainty about how to get there. Michael Jackson was mid-rehearsal when Kelly came in. He was working on a transition sequence, something between two sections that wasn't quite resolving the way he wanted it to. The choreographers in the room stepped back when Kelly appeared in the doorway. Nobody told them to. They just did. Kelly stood near the door and watched. He watched for about 90 seconds, arms loosely crossed, expression neutral. Michael ran the sequence twice more. The second attempt was cleaner than the first. Kelly watched that one too, without comment. When the music cut, Kelly spoke. "Can I ask you something?" Michael turned. He recognized Gene Kelly immediately. Every performer of his generation did, and Michael more than most. "Of course, Mr. Kelly." "That backward slide," Kelly said it without warmth or malice, purely descriptive. "Is that a dance move or a magic trick?" The rehearsal pianist set down his coffee cup with the specific care of someone who doesn't want to produce any sound. "I'm sorry," Michael said. "I mean exactly what I said. Is it dancing or is it an illusion?" Kelly walked a few steps forward, his eyes reading Michael the way an experienced eye reads anything, steadily, without drama. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like misdirection. You're deceiving the audience's eye. That's a real skill, but it's not inherently the same as dancing." Michael didn't respond right away. He let the statement settle in the room. "Magicians fool the eye," Kelly continued. "Dancers fight gravity. They go up, they come down, they put real force against real resistance. What you do, you eliminate friction. You float backward across a stage. That's a fundamentally different thing from what I'm describing." "What's the hardest thing you ever had to dance?" Michael asked. Kelly blinked. It wasn't the response he was expecting, and he let it show for just a second. "Broadway melody sequence," he said. "1952. I spent 11 weeks on it before cameras ever rolled. Double air turns, power slides, full commitment on every single landing. Actual force, actual weight meeting the floor. You can't manufacture that kind of thing." "I know that sequence," Michael said. "I'm sure you've seen it." "I mean, I know it." A brief pause. "Can I have some space?" What Gene Kelly didn't know, what nobody standing in that room knew, was the specific relationship Michael Jackson had with the Broadway melody sequence. He had watched it close to 200 times, not as entertainment. He watched it the way a person studies something they intend to completely understand, frame by frame when he could manage it, tracking the weight shifts, the timing of the air positions, the distinction between when Kelly landed on a full foot versus a toe, and why that choice, and what it changed about the visual line of the movement, and what it required mechanically to produce. He had been doing this since he was 11 years old, lying on the floor in front of a television that was too small for the room. He was 24 now. He had been studying Gene Kelly for 13 years. He walked to the center of the floor. The choreographers moved back again, the same as before. Kelly stayed where he was, watching. Michael stood still for a moment. He wasn't preparing himself. He wasn't building toward anything visibly. He was just finding the starting point of it. Then he started. Kelly's first internal adjustment, registered nowhere except in a slight shift of his posture, came from the jump. Michael went directly into the athletic core of the Broadway melody sequence. Not the moonwalk, not anything from his own catalog. The foundation of Kelly's hardest work. The jump was legitimately high. Kelly had a precise internal calibration for what counted as high and what was just enthusiasm, built over 5 decades of watching bodies move. What he was looking at right now registered as the real thing. The double air turn was clean and fast and controlled. The landing hit the floor with full weight, no cushioning, No mercy to his own joints. Kelly uncrossed his arms. The power slides came next. This was the section Kelly had spent the majority of those 11 weeks on, because the slides had to carry mass behind them. A slide that looked effortless was a failed slide. The audience needed to feel the friction being overcome, the force propelling the movement. Every choreographer who had ever attempted to reproduce this sequence had gotten the technical steps accurate in the feeling wrong. Too smooth, too light, missing the weight. Michael's slides were not missing the weight. Kelly took 3 steps toward the center of the room. He didn't register that he'd moved. And then Michael stopped being Gene Kelly and started being Michael Jackson. It didn't happen suddenly. It happened the way a road curves. Gradually enough that you don't catch the exact moment it changed direction, but you know it has. The athleticism remained intact. The force, the ground contact, the commitment to each landing. But Michael's center of gravity started tracking differently. The geometry of his body began producing shapes that didn't exist in any vocabulary Kelly could reference. He was still landing with Kelly's weight. He was still moving with Kelly's momentum. But the angles were becoming something that should have been structurally impossible and was not. Then the lean started. Not the moonwalk yet, just the lean first. That forward diagonal that appears in photographs and still reads like a camera trick to people who weren't in the room. At the velocity he was carrying, with the momentum accumulated through Kelly's own sequence, the lean should have ended with Michael on the floor within about half a second. The physics involved were straightforward. Instead, it held. He sustained it. And from that angle, from that specific geometry that had no business being stable, the floor began moving underneath him, backward, smooth, frictionless. The moonwalk coming directly out of the hardest sequence Gene Kelly ever built, at an angle Kelly had spent 40 years believing was unavailable to the human body. Kelly stopped moving. He was 5 feet from Michael and he simply stopped. The sequence ended. Michael came back to standing, neutral, composed. He looked at Kelly the same way he had looked at him when Kelly first spoke. Open, attentive, waiting. Kelly looked at him. Not with admiration, not exactly. With something more primary than that. The expression of a person encountering a problem they didn't know existed until 20 seconds ago. "How are your feet doing that?" Kelly said. It came out less like a question and more like the beginning of a sentence he didn't know how to finish. "The weight transfer starts about 3 counts before it looks like it does," Michael said. "You shift the center first. The lean is what follows from that. The floor doesn't move until the center is already there." Kelly crouched down. 70 years old, and he crouched down and looked at Michael's feet with the focused attention of a craftsman examining a joint he doesn't understand. He stayed down there for a long moment, working through it silently. Then he stood. "Do it again," Kelly said. "Just the transition, just the moment where it shifts." Michael did it again, at half speed, just the transition. Kelly watched the feet, then Kelly tried to replicate the weight shift himself. And it was instructive not because he failed badly. He was far too technically developed for that. But because the gap between what Kelly produced and what Michael had just done was specific and visible and consistent. Kelly's version was competent. It was not the same thing. "You're moving the center before the body acknowledges it's moving," Kelly said largely to himself. "Yes. And you arrived at this how?" "I felt it first," Michael said. "Then I worked backwards to understand the mechanics." Kelly was quiet for a moment. One of the choreographers near the back wall had his hand over his mouth. Not dramatically, just because he needed somewhere to put the feeling. "I called your work a magic trick," Kelly said. "You did. That was wrong." "It wasn't entirely wrong," Michael said. And his voice was the same as it had been since Kelly first walked in. Quiet, unhurried. "There's misdirection in it. What you said was accurate. But the misdirection is built on top of something structural. If the mechanical work underneath isn't precise, the illusion collapses. You can't have one without the other. They're the same thing operating at 2 different levels." Kelly put his hand on Michael's shoulder. Not as a performance, just as one person acknowledging another when something has genuinely shifted between them. "I walked in here to correct you," he said. "That's not how this ended." He stayed for another 40 minutes. Not to evaluate, not to correct, not to instruct. He stood near the wall and watched Michael work through the rest of the rehearsal and periodically asked a question about timing, about how Michael was thinking through a specific transition, about the relationship between the musical phrase and the weight shift underneath it. And Michael would answer, sometimes demonstrate, and Kelly would watch with the attention of someone who still knows how to learn new things from people who know something he doesn't. Nobody in that room spoke about it publicly for years. The choreographers mentioned it in careful company. The rehearsal pianist brought it up once, with people he trusted. There was no footage, no record, no documentation beyond human memory, and one private journal that wouldn't surface for over a decade. Gene Kelly died in 1996. Among his personal journals, his family found an entry dated April 14, 1983. Most of it was private. Near the end, he wrote, "Went to see Michael Jackson rehearse this afternoon with the intention of explaining the difference between technique and spectacle. He demonstrated that the distinction I was drawing was incorrect. What he does is technique. It produces something that looks impossible because it is mechanically demanding in ways I hadn't mapped. I left understanding my own work better than when I arrived. That doesn't happen at 70. I'm grateful it did." The final line of the entry. "He learned from me somewhere along the way. Today I learned from him more." In 1986, Kelly introduced Michael at an awards ceremony. The introduction was unusually specific for a room expecting broad compliments. Kelly described what Michael did with precise technical language, the kind that means something to another dancer and washes past everyone else in the room. Michael received it without expression. He knew who Kelly was actually talking to. So here's a question worth sitting with. Has anyone ever looked at what you do and called it a trick? Told you it didn't count as the real thing because it didn't fit the category they were trained to recognize? Leave it in the comments. Not the moment someone doubted you, the moment you realized they were measuring with the wrong tool.